Hello again, welcome back to Asgard, and welcome back to the third episode of our IC2 Classic Mod Spotlight mini-series. Today we're going to be looking at power generation within IC2 Classic because there is a plethora of different options for power generation, and we're going to cover all the power generation as well as power transfer through cables, power storage, and transformers. However, we will not be covering nuclear power today. That's going to be its own separate section because there is a lot to nuclear power that we need to go over. Now, a couple things that I do suggest you go ahead and craft before you even turn your attention towards power or even start thinking about power generation. So first up, we have the EU Raider. This is fairly easy to craft. You can definitely craft this before you start getting into power generation, but it does make your life a whole lot easier. One of the features of the EU Raider, if you look here, under the tooltip, you can see if you hold control, you have your actions. The main thing here is a mode switch key. In my case, mode switch is set to subtract. Of course, these change depending on what your keybind is. It does update in real time, but we can switch between EU Reader modes. So what we can do is we can hold subtract with our EU Reader out and then right click, and you can see we can switch between capabilities measuring, total emitted measuring, packet measuring, total packets measuring, source path renderer, sync path renderer, source path area, sync path area, and back to average measuring. But one of the most important features of the EU Reader is if you have this on your hotbar, if we look at, say, the generator, you can see it generates 10 EU. Now, if I was to put this and take it off my hotbar, you'll notice that generator does not show. Another really nice feature of the EU Raider that you should keep in mind is once you get a quantum suit helmet or a nanosuit helmet, you can actually craft this together with the EU Raider, and then you won't have to keep it on your hotbar anymore. You can just have it displayed all the time. So if I was to take my quantum suit helmet, put it here, put my EU Raider, and there we go, Achievement High Tech Wonder saved. And if we throw this on now, see, I can see all the different generations. And this is true of pretty much any machine or power generation item. So you can see here that all of these tell the generation power. Cables tell how much their limit for transfer is, as well as their energy loss. Transformers tell you what they transform, what their in and out is. And storage tells you your max input and your max storage. So very, very handy. I do suggest you get that EU Reader. It just makes your life a whole lot easier. Take it from me. And then next up we have the wrench. What this does is if we were to put down a block, if you shift right click the front of a block, it'll actually turn it away from you. If you right click a block, it will turn the face towards you. Now if you right click the front of the block or shift right click the back of the block, it's going to attempt to pick up the machine. Now some machines, the majority of machines within IC2 Classic, just like within IC2 Experimental, when they are broken with the standard bronze wrench, there is a certain chance that they'll actually get picked up as the machine, but there's also a chance that they'll be broken down into a machine block. Now, there's no specific percentage. Basically, the percentage is dependent upon the machine itself. So, for example, if I set down a geothermal generator and we hold shift over it, you can see the drop chance on that is 89%. But then if we set down, say, a terraformer, which terraformer we're not going to be covering in this episode, we will cover it in the next episode, but you can see that the drop chance on that is 75%. So it is dependent upon the machine and not the bronze wrench itself as to what the percent is going to be that you're actually going to get the machine back. Now, one thing to note is anytime that you rotate the machine, it is going to use a little bit of durability from your wrench. I believe it's 1 durability to rotate, it's 5 for special actions, and 10 for trying to pick up the machine. There's also one other additional tool that we're going to be covering a little bit later, but we're going to wait until we get into the cables before we cover that tool. And one quick thing that I want to bring up before we get into power generation and power transfer is within IC2 Classic as well as IC2 Experimental, power is handled a little bit differently than RF, for example. So each cable has a specific amount of energy that it can transfer. And the way that power works within IC2 is that a cable that's set to transfer, let's say 32 LV. Okay, any generator that is transmitting power along that low voltage current will send out 1 packet per tick. So 1 packet of 32 at the most, you know, for example, this generator right here is only going to be emitting 1 packet of 10 EU per tick. But if you have a power storage block or something like that, it will be emitting 32 EU per tick. 1 packet. And cables can handle any number of packets as long as they're within the correct voltage. So you could have multiple generators on the same LV line. It's not going to cause the wire to burn up or machines to explode or anything like that, because it's still transmitting LV power. It's just multiple packets of it. So you can have as many packets running through a cable as you want. You just have to make sure that your voltages are correct when you set that up. And we'll get a little bit more into that whenever we talk about transformers. So anyways, the first very, very basic power generation block within the mod is just the standard generator. If we open this up, this is the GUI. It's very, very basic. There's not a whole lot going on here, right? So basically what we can do is we can put any kind of combustible into this, and it's going to start generating power. So you can see that's generating 10 EU per tick, and it's just storing it into this. And you'll also notice that many of the IC2 machines and tools within Classic all have really nice sounds and stuff like that included within them. Now there are muffler upgrades and stuff if you don't like the sounds. We'll get into those later on. But anyways, this generator just burns any kind of combustible fuel, and this can be pretty much anything that a standard furnace can take, as well as some things such as fuel cans. And basically fuel cans, what you can do is you can, in a canning machine, which we'll talk about canning machines a little bit more in detail next episode, but within a canning machine you can take things like glowstone, gunpowder, coal fuel, biofuel, redstone, fuel, and you can fill those into fuel cans. But if you have some kind of like liquid fuel or something to that nature, or you want to use redstone or glowstone within the generator, you can use the fuel can. Now next up, let's say the generator is not enough power and you want to upgrade. Well, lava is generally the next step that most people go when it comes to power generation. The geothermal generator will be your first lava-based power source. You'll notice it generates 20 EU per tick. It does generate double what the standard generator produces. And what you can do is you can put lava into this. You can either just right click it and it's going to put lava into this generator, or you can actually put the buckets in manually if you want to, or you can pipe in lava. Now the geothermal generator is very efficient in the fact that it will stop burning lava when it doesn't need to make any more power. You can also see that it has a 24 bucket internal storage, so it can have up to 24 buckets of lava in it at once. But you will note, however, that there is no power storage here. This has no power storage whatsoever. So for example, if we were to grab ourselves a bat box, this is the very basic power storage within IC2 Experimental, and we set this bat box down, you'll notice that now it's generating power, and now this is steadily burning through that lava. It actually sounds kind of like molten lava kind of bubbling around in there. But this does require something next to it that can take the power. It either needs cables, it needs power storage block, it needs a transformer, it needs a machine, it needs something that can accept that power. Now next up we have the thermal generator. This is another low voltage lava-based generator or heat-based generator. This one is really, really cool. Let's say we just set it down like right here, for example. You'll notice that it's producing 0.61 EU per tick right now. I'll tell you what, I'm actually going to put it right here. So you can see it's steadily building up energy, and I'm not doing anything. There's nothing in this. Right now it's 0.58 EU per tick. And the reason is the thermal generator actually can absorb heat from its surroundings to generate passive power. Now there's other ways to generate power, and we'll talk about those in just a second. But let's come out here so I don't burn my house down. And we put a lava source block behind it. You'll see that out here with the lava source, it's generating 0.75. It's actually probably going to go up just a little bit more maybe. No, 0.75 is actually where it should be, I think. And for each lava source block that you place around it, it's going to get an additional 0.05 EU per tick. So it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's passive. It's early game, very early game passive EU generation. Can't beat that, right? Now in addition, you can also do the same things that you can with the geothermal generator. We can throw in lava buckets, and you'll notice that it gets a boost. You can see there's fuel in here, and you actually get a little bit more lava than with the standard geothermal generator. So whereas a geothermal generator, one bucket of lava is 1,000 lava, within this one, it's more like 1,200. So lava goes a bit farther with this. It generates more power. It does produce 25 EU per tick. It has power storage within it. So it's pretty much just an upgraded version of the geothermal generator in a lot of ways. It does require magma blocks. So you are going to have to go to the nether, and it does require some advanced alloy and carbon plate, which we'll get into how to make that stuff later. But you are going to have some basic infrastructure put up before you can get the thermal generator. Next up, we have my two personal favorite sources of early game power generation. That is the liquid fuel generator and the slag generator. First up, the liquid fuel generator. If we were to place this down, you can see there's a fluid tank here, and there's a couple slots here, and it can store up to 10,000 EU within its internal buffer. Now, of course, it can also feed into a bat box, just like these other generators. Now, this bat box is full, so it's not going to feed any power into that. But if we take a look here at the liquid fuel generator, you can see that it can burn wood gas, biomass, seed oil, fruit juice, honey, and ethanol. And the fact that it can burn wood gas is a major plus in my opinion, because if you recall, we covered the wood gasificator before, and there's also the electric wood gasificator, which we'll cover next episode. But I will also tell you that the liquid fuel generator also supports Actually Addition's canola oil, and that goes all the way up to empowered. The top tier, the empowered canola oil, actually produces 30 EU per tick. So it's a little bit below forestry ethanol, but it's still very good power production. So you're going to be topping out LV power, which is nice. But let's grab a bucket of this forestry ethanol and just throw it in there, just to give you an idea. And you can see that it's kicking through power at a fairly steady rate. Now this thing has an internal buffer of 16 millibuckets, and you can also pump fluids in, or you can put them in manually here, or just right click them in the world. All those options persist across all of our liquid generators. And then we come to the slag generator. You can see that that generates 12.5 EU. If we set this down, you can see there's a nice little GUI in here. It's got 8,000 EU internal storage. And what we can do is we can throw in some kind of combustible. We're going to throw in charcoal. And about every 12 seconds, you can see that it produces scrap. And that's pretty much what the slag generator does. It allows you to get a little bit of power as well as some scrap early game, which then of course you can turn into scrap boxes and open those. Now scrap boxes, just so you guys are aware, you can actually look in here and see all the drops that can come from scrap boxes. There is all the different ores are in here, redstone, diamonds, emeralds, there's all kinds of things that can come from scrap boxes. But the one that I think might pique your guys' curiosity the most, you can actually get nether stars from scrap boxes. It's a very, very low chance, but it is possible. And you can also get glowstone and stuff before you go to the nether. There's just some really nice things. So setting up a way to automatically open scrap boxes isn't really a bad thing at all. You know, it's kind of useful. Now what we can do is we can also take this scrap and throw it in here. And you'll notice it's not very efficient. It's 100 power per scrap. But you can then turn around and burn the scrap if you don't want to make scrap boxes with it. So that is an alternative that you can use within the slag generator. So just think of this as an upgraded generator. You're going to get a byproduct, and you produce a bit more power a little bit more efficiently as well. Now next up, let's talk about solar power. There is a fair few options that you have for solar power within IC2 Classic. First up, you have the standard solar panel. This only produces a measly 1 EU per tick whenever it can see the sun. So for example, if we put a bat box down here next to it, you can see it's steadily generating some power. Next up, you have the low voltage solar panel. Now this is kind of an upgraded version. You do have to use 8 of the solar panels, and that's true for all the versions. So medium voltage is going to use 8 low voltage and a transformer. High voltage is mediums and an IV transformer. So they do get exponentially more expensive as you go. High voltage is not cheap, to say the least. But the low voltage produces 8 EU per tick. And it looks just the same. You can set a bat box down and get power generation in that. Then you have the medium voltage, which produces 64 EU per tick. And of course, we don't want to put a bat box down for this one. We're going to put down an MFE. You can see in here that it's generating quite a bit of power. And then lastly, you have the high voltage. This one generates a whopping 512 EU per tick. It is very, very powerful. And also as a side note, this slot right here, what you can do is you can put batteries of the specific tier. In this case, you would use a Lapotron crystal, and you can place it in there and you'll notice it starts getting charged. And another nice thing to note is the standard solar panel, the 1 EU per tick one, does have a drop chance of 90, but all the ones above that have a drop chance of 100. So if you wanted to, I mean, and you thought you were going to be gone for a while, you could always take, say, an HV solar panel with you to charge up your stuff on the fly. So if you wanted to, it's not going to break or anything like that on you. It does actually charge a Lapotron crystal at a fairly good rate. It is a lot of power generation. Now in addition, you can actually upgrade your standard solar panel without going straight into the low voltage. What you can do is you can craft this solar turbine. It's not very expensive. It's actually a bit cheaper than trying to tier these up right out the gate. The solar turbine generates 10 EU per tick, and what you can do is you can set it down. You can see there's a GUI in here. You're going to see the heat building up in this. This is basically the heat that's generated by the sun. And what we can do is we can take a water bucket, throw some water in here, just like that. And then if I was to grab a bat box and set it down, you can see that we're steadily generating some power. Now right now the heat's not very high. It's not generating the full amount of power that it could be. But as the heat level goes up, it's at 7% now, and you'll notice it's generating power at a little bit faster of a rate. So if you want to upgrade this solar panel, this is the next step for early game. Because going straight into low voltage, medium voltage, high voltage, it's very, very expensive. And progressively so. But that pretty much covers solar power. So next up, let's talk about water-based power. First up, you have different tiers of water mills. You have the standard water mill, which can generate 1 EU, low voltage water mill, which can generate 4 EU, medium voltage, which generates 32 EU, and high voltage, which generates 128 EU. Now, the way these are set up, there's a couple ways that you can do it. You can either do passive power production or active power production. So passive, what we would do is let's take the low voltage water mill. I'm not going to set up all of these on camera because they all are set up pretty much the same. There is a couple of changes once you get to MV and HV, which I'll go over those. But what you'll do to get optimal power production with your low voltage water mill is you're going to set it in the middle of a 3x3 cube, and this is for passive power production. And then what we're going to do is we're basically just going to go through and fill this up with water. And you want to make sure and cover up all the sides of your water mill. And now if I was to attach cables to this, or a bat box or something of that nature, we can start generating power. So you'll notice that this is an LV water mill producing power passively. Now basically, if you have passive power production with a water mill, the amount of EU produced right there is not what you're actually going to be producing. So for this standard water mill, if you have all sides covered in the 3x3, you're going to generate 0.25 EU per tick. Just passive free power. LV is going to produce 1.87 if you have all the sides covered. And once you get to MV and HV, they actually search in a 5x5 range. So you'll need a little bit bigger cube to get optimal power production. Now, of course, one side of this is not going to be able to be covered with water because you're going to have to connect cables or some kind of power transfer, power storage, something of that nature. That's taking into account that one of those sides is going to be used. Now, the MV one, when you have the full 5x5 filled with water, is going to produce 9.76 EU per tick, and the HV one is going to produce 48.8 EU per tick. Now that's just for the passive power generation. Now let's say we set up a high voltage and we pumped water into this, okay? And let's grab some kind of power storage. We're going to use an MFSU. If we set this up here, you can see that one bucket of water produced 500 EU. Now I'm sure you'll notice that the HV water mill does eat through water like it's going out of style. It's almost instantaneously eating a bucket of water. However, it's producing 128 EU per tick for that bucket of water. So it's about 500 EU per bucket, but you can pipe water in to this to keep it running constantly. You can either do it the manual way, throw a bucket in, or you can just connect some kind of fluid-based conduit or fluid transfer system into this and produce power. And when you're feeding water into this, that's when you're going to get those numbers that are on the water mill. So 1 for the standard, and so on. Now next up, we have a couple other water-based generators. We have the wave generator and the ocean generator. So I'm going to take you out a little ways to a bigger body of water because you do need a bit of water for this to work. So first up, we have the ocean generator, and this actually requires a large amount of water. Okay, an ocean is best for this, but you can dig it out yourself. Basically, it's going to need a 31 by 31 by 31 area. Now, it doesn't all have to be water. There can be solid blocks in there, but it's going to reduce the power production the more solid blocks that you have. So to place this, what you're going to do is you're going to put it at the center bottom of your 31 by 31. I'm going to place it like right here, for example. And now if we were to attach, say, an MFE to this, you can see that it just turned blue and shows like a little wave effect. That means it's running now. And you can see that right here it's generating 122 EU per tick. So that's where I've got it right now, is a fairly good area. There's a bit of water. Now I will say that bit of land over there is probably dropping the power generation down by a bit. But if your wave generator is set up properly, you're generally going to get around 100 EU per tick from the ocean generator. So just bear in mind it's a 31 by 31 by 31, and your ocean generator needs to be in the center of that 31 by 31 and at the bottom of it. Now next up we have the wave generators. These are, if you've seen my IC2 Classic series, you know that these are my personal favorite. I absolutely love these things. So basically whenever you set up your wave generator, you're going to want it to face a bit of water just on the front side. The back side doesn't matter if it's solid blocks or whatever, that's okay. But basically this is going to check in a 15 by 15 by 15 range in front of it. And so the more water that you have there, the more power that's going to be produced. And let's set an MFE on top of it. So you can see that it's generating power right now. And if we check it, right now it's only generating about 17 power. So not all that much. Now it's down to 14. These do refresh a lot, and their power fluctuates heavily. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes you're going to generate just 14. This is actually a bit on the low side. By default, there's 28 now. And this is an example of what you can do with the EU reader. You can see kind of what your gain is there. But the wave generators are going to generate between 0 and 144 EU per tick. Okay, now when it's raining, they actually get a 20% boost to their power production. And if there's a thunderstorm, they get a 400% times boost. So we're going to change it to a thunderstorm real quick. And you can see that my power is steadily going up. We're up to 48, 54, 59, 64 as that thunderstorm kicks in. So now we're getting up to some really good power generation. 100 EU per tick right now is what we're generating. Just bear in mind, rain is 20%, thunder is 400%. These do fluctuate a lot, but generally you're going to get somewhere between about 15 and 30 EU per tick. Then when it's storming, you'll see it rise a bit, depending on if it's rain or thunderstorm. And also, unlike the ocean generator, these only search in one direction in front of their front face. So this front face, it has those slots there, those little slits in the front of it. Now next up we have the last type of natural power production. And I'm going to go ahead and fix the weather and everything. But that is the windmill. Now with the windmill there's only just the standard version. So you don't have all the different types of, you know, HV, MV and all of that. So just kind of bear that in mind. Now if we take the windmill, let's set it down up here I think. The windmill is going to produce more power the higher up it is. Now you notice this is the GUI. There is no internal storage or anything like that. And this bar right here, this is going to steadily fill up as it gets wind pressure. This tells you basically how much wind pressure there is. There we go. I was waiting for the sounds. That's what it sounds like when it's running. And it's kicking on and everything. So if we put a bat box down right here, we take a look, you can see that we're steadily getting some power. What are we getting right now? We're producing around 6 EU per tick. Now you'll notice it says on here generates 4 EU. So basically the reason it says that is because that's just an outdated tooltip that will be fixed for release. It does generate a bit more. We're up to, yeah, getting close to 13 is what we're producing at the moment. And the higher you go, the more power it will produce. It does have a search area of about 9 blocks in front of it that it'll check. Oh, we just got a big jump. And right now we're generating about 20, a little over 20. So you can see, I mean, it generates a decent amount of power, and it's just passive. So you can see this bat box is already over halfway filled. And that's pretty much the windmill. Just make sure it's got plenty of air in front of it, and it's just going to produce you some passive power generation. And now lastly, we have the fuel boiler and the basic steam turbine. Now, the steam turbine does not have a GUI. You cannot open that. But the fuel boiler, basically you have 4 different slots here. Right here, you can actually put water buckets into this to supply this fluid tank with water. Next up right here, this is where your fuel goes that you burn up. And you can see your fuel level right here. Now the fuel boiler only accepts filled fuel cans. So you're going to have to fill a fuel can with some kind of fuel, then put it into the fuel boiler, and that's how you're actually going to burn this water up and create steam. Next up you have heat. This tells you how hot your boiler is, which basically affects the speed at which it changes water over into steam. And this last tank here is steam. And this boiler can actually export 2 steam turbines next to it, and 1 fuel boiler, if it's kept supplied with water and fuel, can power up to 4 basic steam turbines. And the steam turbines, they produce 40 EU each per tick. So basically, off of one fuel boiler, you can be fueling 160 EU per tick. So right here, I have a filled fuel can. We're going to go ahead and grab that, which we'll get into the canning machine, like I said, next episode. But if we take and we throw this filled fuel can into the fuel boiler, you'll notice that it starts running. It's going to start, that heat's going to start going up. Now, initially, it's not going to burn up any water because it is going to have to burn through and get that heat up a bit. And it does take a little while for this to get hot enough to actually start producing steam. I'm actually on the 3rd filled fuel can at the moment. And I will say that the fuel boiler is something that is a little bit more gauged for a little bit later game. The fuel boiler itself does require iridium, so you're going to have to get UU matter production. The steam turbine itself is not quite as expensive, but you can see that once it hits 100 heat, it is going to start producing some steam. So now what we can do is we can take and set up our basic steam turbine, and you can see that it's turned red. It's running right now, and it's accepting steam from this, and it doesn't eat through a whole lot of steam at a time. But if we put an MFE down, you can see that our power generation is going up with that steam turbine running. And luckily, the steam turbine doesn't take any kind of heat up period, so this is something that you're definitely going to want to have automated. Keep your heat on the fuel boiler up, and then just keep those basic steam turbines running. So, but you can see that the power generation is going up at a fairly steady rate. It's actually producing quite a bit of power just with one steam turbine running. And of course, whenever you set this up, you're going to want probably 4 of these basic steam turbines running at a given time. And one quick thing to note about the fuel boiler is when it is at max heat, it's actually going to consume 15 times less fuel than when it's heating up. So if you keep your fuel boiler heated up and running, it takes a whole lot less fuel to sustain that, and it'll keep those 4 basic steam turbines running, thus producing you 160 EU per tick for minimal input, mainly just water and a little bit of fuel at that point. So very, very useful. And one quick thing I wanted to make sure and make note of is that the fuel boiler, just so there's no confusion, if the heat reaches 800, it's not going to explode. There is no way for the fuel boiler to explode. Okay, so, you know, even though you've got other machines that if they get too much power and stuff like that, they can explode, the fuel boiler is not one of those. There's nothing that's going to cause it to explode. So go ahead and get that heat up, and then you can run it, you know, and get that fuel reduction cost for having maximum heat. Now, lastly, as far as generators go, before we get into the transformers, the energy storage, and the cables and stuff, we have these electric flux generators. There is a small, medium, and large electric flux generator. And basically all you need to know about these is when you set them down, they have 5 gray sides, 1 red side, okay, for all of these. And basically this one is an LV, this one is MV, this one is HV. Now what these do is whenever they're injected with EU, and you inject EU on the gray sides here, they're going to convert that into RF and eject it out the red side, okay? And the conversion rate is 1 EU equals 8 RF. So the LV can convert 32 EU to 256 RF. MV can convert 128 EU to 1024 RF. And the large one converts 512 EU to 4096 RF. And these can receive infinite number of packets per tick. And every tick they'll try to send their internal buffers over. They have like a small internal buffer that they store EU, and they will try to convert it every tick and send it into RF if there's space in the, you know, whatever RF block that you have on the other side. So you can have cables, you can have capacitor banks, anything like that, and it'll try to convert it and send it over to those power banks. So it's just a nice way if you have a lot of EU production, especially whenever you get into like really high solar panels, stuff like that, you can actually run your RF stuff with these flux generators. Alright, I tell you what, I'm actually going to split this into 2 parts due to length. You really don't realize how much you have to cover until you go to start covering it. So I've already broken my original plan of 5 episodes. It's now 7. It's okay. But anyways, next episode, we're going to quickly talk about cables, power transfer, power storage, as well as charge pads. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I hope you found it helpful. As always, if you guys have any questions, do let me know down in the comments, and I will do my best to get those answered for you. And as always, if you guys enjoyed it, be sure to hit that like button and go ahead and subscribe if you're not already to stay up to date with when new videos come out. And with that, I hope to see you guys next time. Until then, as always, do take care, stay safe, and I will see you guys next time.